Welcome to the 332nd episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. Stay tuned for my interview with Matthew Wolff, author of the Ronin Saga. Stay tuned for the interview. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen to audiobooks during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro.fm app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best, your local bookseller. Reading and Writing Podcast special offer: get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 with your first month of membership with code RWPodcast. That's code RWPodcast for 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 for your first month of membership at Libro.fm. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Matthew Wolff, author of the Ronin Saga. Matthew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about the Ronin Saga yet, how would you describe the novels?
I always like finding new and inventive ways to describe it, but the Ronin Saga is essentially, it's a 9-book planned epic high fantasy series. It has dragons, magic, elves, all the good fantasy fair stuff. The heart of the story, to get kind of people wrapped around the setting, is the Lord of the Rings kind of world and setting with its own magic system and flora and fauna and languages, meets Knights of the Round Table. And a lot of times people are like, okay, that's a lot of stuff to wrap my head around. But basically the plot line revolves around the main character, Gray, who's 18, and his 2 friends. They had this kind of Harry Potter trio. And their whole life they've heard about this cursed legend called the Ronin. And some people might know, listening, the idea of the Ronin was this kind of wandering or masterless samurai. But in their world, in the world of Farhaven, this magical world, Ronin is to be this curse. Mothers tell their children to go to bed in time, otherwise, the Ronin will get them, because they were these great heroes of the world that fell and kind of became these dark legends, kind of the boogeymen of the world, so to speak. And they wielded the 9 elements. The elements of wind, the Ronin of water, of fire, of stone, these kind of great elemental heroes. Now, Gray hears about them, and they're just a storied myth. They're just, this kind of, old men spit their name and just as curse. But as his shadow falls back upon the lands and cities are being destroyed, this great legend has returned. Gray, lo and behold, he finds out, he runs into them face to face and sees the 9 legends before him. Ronin of wind curling about in the Ronin of fire wreathing from his frame. And he finds out that, without going into spoilers and all that, he finds out that he has an intimate connection with the Ronin. So now he has to find out that he is the next kind of generation. So he has to go find the others and prove to this world that every city, every town is going to shutter their doors against them. And he has to prove that he's going to be different in something that's going to change and help the world rather than destroy it.
And so do you remember the original idea that led you to write the Ronin Saga novels?
Oh, that's a good question. The original idea it was kind of a combination thing. It was kind of like sifting for gold. I read all these high fantasy books and I loved them. I read, Wheel of Time and, more recently Brandon Sanderson, things like that. But it was I love the Knights of the Round Table, and I played video games with, that had this kind of undertone, but I've seen the elements, and I thought, like, what if I could combine the 2? And then I thought about myself, and I was like, we got the earth, wind, fire, all those classic ones, but what if we could do the element of flesh and even the element of metal? So I think kind of those 2 were really unique and interesting. So I kind of combined those 2 together and kind of came up with a story.
So what was the path to publication like for you for publishing your first book? Had you always wanted to be a writer?
I didn't. I had an entirely different path, actually. Originally, I went through kind of a weird series of events. But the first thing that kind of started was I was going to school in Oregon before I ended up transferring to Santa Barbara. And I was, I went down a weird road. First, I wanted to eschew all standard colleges and everything in general. I had a pretty good, GPA and took my SATs, and I just was overwhelmed by everything. So I found myself falling in love with fantasy as this kind of escape. And in these fantasy novels, I haven't really told too many people this, there was these characters like these herbalists. So I wanted to become a master herbalist. That was my plan. And my dad's like, I'll only kind of agree to that if you go to a 4-year accredited college that I concur with at least 1 year of a different thing before you transfer to this herbalist thing. And I was 18 at the time. And I went to Oregon State University. And in my first, let's say, week or so, I found these astronomy and physics classes. And I decided I was going to be an astrophysicist. So I committed about 2 years to that, got pretty deep in, got my calculus down. I was always a little behind the curve on that, but I loved it. And then I just, all I was doing on the side, I was finding these little moments to write. And I found the little moments consuming everything. And I just fell in love with the writing aspect. And that's all I wanted to do. And then when it came time to publication, I wrote. So I started when I was 18, and I wrote for about kind of like Aragon Inheritance. I was, big idea, but it was a long way away. And wrote for about 8 years. And then when I turned about 24, 25, I went to conventions and I went to writers' conferences and all these things and pitched to agents and got some interested ones. And that's where I met one of my agents at the time, and then an editor. And then I won't go into all of it, but kind of through a roundabout way, all of it kind of fell away, and I decided I wanted to release it on my own. And so I published in 2015, I think, and became top 5 bestseller, and just kind of fell in love and with the process, and made amazing fans, and kind of been continuing from there.
And so what has the self-publication process been like for you?
Ups and downs and hurdles and triumphs, and it's like anything, I guess. In the beginning, I just, I was just a kid writing and falling in love, and I wrote the book a million times to make it the best process, because I knew that in the process of any book, specifically with self-publishing, the first novel is often, it's rare to get these kind of magnum opuses. So that's why it took 8 years. So I wrote it again and again. But when I finally decided to release it, I did a lot of research. I really, I knew I was kind of young, and so I just did, a blog. I found all these different blogs from everything from like, what platform to publish on, what's the best marketing strategies, and blah blah blah. And a lot of it was just kind of hit or miss. But I found one, and it got to the top 5 on Amazon. But it wasn't until I started. My real kind of claim to fame was going to these conventions. I would go to San Diego Comic-Con, which a lot of people know. I'm in San Diego, and 140,000 people, and it's insane. And Chicago and New York and all these different Comic-Cons. And I found that what I really love doing is I love engaging with people. And I think I mentioned to you one time when we were talking, my first convention was this little tiny Comic-Con in Ventura. And I think there was probably like 500 people there. It was the first physical copy I ever sold. This time I probably had, 5 or 10,000 sales in ebooks, but totally different beast than telling your book to a potential reader. And this grandma walked up, and she was this sweet older lady, and she just was like, "What's this book about?" And I remember just fumbling over my words, and being like, "It's got dragons, and it's elements," and she was so sweet, and she just kind of, silenced me and said, I know my grandson will love it. I'm in.
So I'm curious, what made you decide to go to these conventions and try to sell, I guess, either hardbacks or paperbacks? What do you remember? What kind of prompted you the first time?
Yeah, the first thing that kind of started it was really a love of was kind of connecting with people. I found that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the aspect of. I kind of liked being away from the computer and having this moment where I could really um, connect and talk about the story from a less theoretical side. Um, sorry, I have a cat in the background. Should I can? Do you want me to?
Yeah. Do you want to take a moment? And
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Let me,
that's okay.
thanks for that.
Not a problem.
Um, so yeah, your question was I so I went to the first convention. I think it was just kind of random how it started. A friend was like, "Hey, there's a table here, and it's a friend of a friend can set you up." And I went, and I remember that for so long, I contacting when I was first selling the book in the first 5-6 months, I get these emails, people like, "Oh, I love these characters," but it just didn't feel as like I don't know. There's something about the engaging and talking with people, and a lot of the times I was talking, most of the time, 99% of the time, I was talking with, especially in the beginning, people who had no idea who I was and what the book was about. So it was kind of a cool way for me to really harness what the book was about and what I did love about it. And then oftentimes we would end up just making these friends, people who loved fantasy and great stories. And so part of, I think, I was talking to a lot of people know who's really amazing author Michael J. Sullivan and his wife, and they were talking about kind of my claim to fame is that I have so many hardcovers and paperbacks sold, and I think the reason why is just because I've gone to these conventions and I go to and hey, do you like fantasy? And they walk up and they're like, yeah, I like fantasy. I'm like, well, okay, stories like Lord of the Rings meets Knights of the Round Table. And they're like, okay, what's that really about? And then I dive into it. And so it's just been this really cool way to make friends and fans for life. And then, when you pass on a book, when I pass on a book, it's always done because I had a connection. So I think people having that connection at these conventions, I think is really, really allowed the saga to grow.
So earlier you were talking about writing and revising your first novel multiple times. What do you think was the biggest thing that you had to learn about writing fiction as you were working on that novel and getting it ready for publication?
That's a really good question. The biggest thing I had to learn, there's so many things I learned. I think the biggest thing I learned is that characters drive the story. I mean, everyone says plot drives the story or this, and you revise and whatnot. But I think going forward, I remember at the very end of the book one when my first edition was done, and an agent asked me, "Hey, I like your book, but I want you to do a little write up on your characters for me." Which I don't think that's super standard, but I was like, okay, cool. So I remember sitting there, and this is only about 3 or 4 years into writing the book, and I had a finished copy, but it was a long ways from where it was now, and I was trying to write down my character, and I felt like it was hard because he didn't feel like he was as there were so many elements to him that I realized he was fairly flat, to be honest. So I think what I went back and kind of learned in the process of that was that the motivations of my character. So now I'll have a big butcher block piece of paper and I'll put it up on the wall. And I'd be like, what does this character want to do? And how does this character's motivation interact with this other character? And I know it sounds pretty standard, but just knowing where they want to go and keeping that in mind, keeping that as my forefront, no matter what, every sentence really drives everything, every plot, every action, every fantasy element, every world building. If I know what my character wants to do, then that makes the story rich. So I think going back, biggest aspect of fiction is learning, just really thinking hard about your characters and being true to what they want to do.
So what are your earliest memories of reading and books?
Um, I think I lightly touched on this one time with you, but we, when I was young, I read The Hobbit. Love The Hobbit because that's, classic. I was probably, 11 or 12. And, but then my mom was like, she's a reader and she's, you got to keep reading. It changes your life. Um, and now going to these conventions and seeing, talking to these kids, um, I just see such a difference, and I see how true she is. But I'll get back to that point later. But so she's like, I'll do anything to make you read. I'll bribe you $5 or $10 a book. And I feel, everyone's like, I was always a reader, but I was not. Um, this $5 or $10 was quite necessary. But even then, the $5 or $10 didn't work, and I would, I just wasn't really a reader until I was about 16 years old, and a good friend, and he took me to a Barnes and Noble, and Genmock was like, all right. Like he pointed at a bookshelf, you're going to read this one, which is like, it was a Wheel of Time book. If anyone's like 14 books, you're going to read Sword of Truth. You're going to read this. And it was like 80 books. He was just, had me, list out, and I was like, I'm going to be 80 by the time I'm done with these. But I sat down and I remember reading one of the first, the Wizard's First Rule. And I just was about a few pages in, and I was like, I don't know, maybe I should go play a video game. By like page 8 or 9 or 10, everything fell away, and I just fell in love with the world, and all I wanted to do was read. And so now here I am.
Great. So what's the next book for you? When will it be published?
Book 4 is we're in the process of it right now. We being me, mostly, it's the royal we. I have developmental editors and line editors, and I think the biggest we is my team. I have alpha and beta readers, and they're so amazing, helpful, and they tell me if Faye is off or, Darius seems a little lacking. But I've been working on it for the last, I think, since 2017, so about 2.5, 3 years, and we're looking to release it. I just finished. I typed the end, the very end of the book, so that was a gratifying, hard to believe moment. But we're looking to have it published in the next 2 months, I think. And I
what's
think
the title?
That is the question. This is the first time, because every book is based on. So we have book 1, The Knife's Edge, book 2, Citadel of Fire. So it's kind of a synonym, and then book 3, Bastion of Sun. So kind of city plus one of the elements. So in each book, they have to go to a different city and find the next element and find the next Ronin and discover. And each city is kind of its own grand magical thing. So, revolves the City of Fires, fire lighting up the night sky, City of Sun, sun shining off these thousands of mirrors and glass columns. Book 4 takes place in the City of Water. However, I've been kind of tossing with some ideas of breaking the trend instead of being, Fortress of Water and something like that. There's some really cool surprises in the book. And so I'm kind of tossing. I have Fates of the Fallen, some other things like Falls that, but that's for the first time, TBD.
Great. I know that self-publishing with ebooks changes almost constantly. What would you do differently if you were just starting to self-publish now in 2020?
I wouldn't worry so much about the platforms. I would just publish directly on Kindle Direct Publishing. I think it's a great platform. It's a constantly shifting and evolving atmosphere. My price point has changed a lot. It's been, $5 or $6 or $7 per book, and then 2 or 3. I think at this point, I really just want to get as many readers as possible. So I probably would have kept it at a lower price point. I wouldn't have done too many things differently. And
what about audiobooks? Because I know that those are seeing a lot more sales in terms of self-publishing.
Oh, that would be the difference thing. I released the audiobook, book 1, 4 months ago, and I've been really lucky and awesome. It's been doing really well, sitting in the top 100 of fantasy. And I got lucky. I got my favorite narrator, Tim Gerard Reynolds, to narrate it, and he's just I could listen to him read a phone book. It's just he's so good. But I would probably have done that earlier. We just released book 2 as of literally today, June 1st. So that's super exciting. Well, I love book 1. I think book 2 really takes off. But I was really having difficulty releasing the audiobook because it's kind of it's kind of one of the situations that it probably had to happen this way. But originally I looked at other, authors who were self-publishing, and I looked at how their sales were kind of consistent with mine until they released audiobooks, and they got this whole new fan base. And I think that's amazing, because there's a lot of people who are too busy, who are on their way to work or whatnot, or, less driving nowadays. But, yeah, I think if I could go back, I would probably have book 2 and book 1 released, and book 3, obviously, release audiobook a little sooner. But the downside is that the only reason I was able to get Tim Gerard Reynolds now is that, I was younger back then. So now we have a little more acclaim. And so I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. In one way, I wish I got so many of these audiobook readers earlier on, but in the other, I think we got this amazing narrator, and kind of thanks to all my fans and all that.
So what writing advice would you offer for listeners who are writing their own stories and novels?
Writing advice. I get this question a lot. I'm usually the one who I usually always just go with, obviously, cut out any minute you can to write, because obviously writing itself is better than plotting and storming and all that stuff. I think the best advice I have is talk to your friends and family. Find one supporter above all else that will listen to you rant and rave about your story, because that one person will make the difference. For me, when I was younger, it was my mom and one of my best friends. And just having that person to lend an ear is just invaluable. But I think the other thing is on an aspect, and I also think the motivation thing I said earlier is really important. If you know your character's motivation and how they work together, kind of do a brainstorm map to understand their ties. I think that really helps. But I think the last thing I'd say is, it's really important for you to set up a program. Like if you're having trouble putting in enough page, if you have, 800 pages, and this doesn't apply to you. So skip to the next part. But if you're having trouble actually putting in the time, which is usually people's kind of main concern, even with established authors, I think setting up a regimen. So what I do for writing, I have all sorts of tips and tricks, and I'm going to be releasing a frequently asked question about writing on my website soon. But the thing that I do that keeps me the most accountable, that allows me to write the most, is I have a little Post-it. And every day I'll put like the date, Monday, and then I'll write. And whenever I write, whether it's a minute or an hour or 2 hours, I'll write it down. And my goal is for 5 to 6 hours a day. And I add up and I write all, an hour here and 20 minutes here, and I add it all up. And if it was 5 hours, then I, cross it off with like a blue highlight or something that kind of like marks that it, I accomplished it. And then I stick it on the wall, and it goes up beside my Tuesday and my Wednesday, and my Thursday. And so when I wake up in the morning, I look at that wall and I go, all right, cool. Like, I'm either yesterday I wrote for 4.5 or 6 or whatever, or like I'm on a roll. And so that kind of keeps me accountable and keeps me excited. And, I think the hardest part about writing is it's like, I could go do something else right now. So making it really feel like, the job that it is, and the rewarding job that is, I think it's the best. Some really good advice.
So what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
I'm always reading a good novel. I just listened to Asia Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. I just read, I think we kind of briefly mentioned it, but just listened to Fish That Ate the Whale. And then Titan is really good. Kind of an account on Rockefeller. It's, get ready. It's a kind of a beast of a book, but it's really good. You have to read it if you're. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I want to go to sleep. I'm going to read an autobiography, but other times there's like really fascinating points of it, and I stay up. I think the other book that I've been reading lately that I really enjoy is this account on the Mongolian Empire. So that's been a really kind of fun read. So I've been doing a lot more nonfiction lately. I think it's Genghis Khan and the making of the modern world. So that's really good, yeah.
So where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and the Ronin Saga novels?
I'm easy to find. Google the Ronin Saga, and you'll find me everywhere. The website's a pretty common way where people will stay connected. RoninSaga.com. That's RONINSAGA. Facebook. Now everything. I'm always a social media behind. I'm also on Instagram as Wolf_writer, and that's writer as in WRITER. I had to pause for a second there. My spelling is you don't have spell check on me. And stay connected. The Audible versions are out, so if you follow the links on the Instagram page or any of the others, then you'll find the links to the audiobook of book 1 and book 2.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Matthew Wolff, author of the Ronin Saga. The novels are available now, so go buy copies. As he mentioned earlier, the 4th novel will be out in the next couple of months. And Matthew, thanks for doing this interview.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Great.